19. The Feast of Ishtar. Ishtar insinuated herself completely into the room. Like the snake she resembled, she glided about the floor, studying the doctor intently. In return, he studied her just as closely. Finally, she cocked her head to one side. "Do you like what you see, Doctor?" she asked. "Brilliant, quite brilliant," he replied enthusiastically. "Platinum alloy skin, I'd guess. Amazingly complex, and yet so supple. Humanoid features are a hangover from the old days, I'd say. Perhaps a hint of vanity, eh? But the snake half of you is good for movement. And durable too, I'd think. Built-in sensors that seem to be very resilient and adaptable. Some kind of positronic brain in there too, with human brain cell analogues. Utterly brilliant." Then he added, "Shame you use such skills for such a depraved purpose." "Ah," she purred amusedly, "morality. The weakness that marks the fool from the genius. The strength that marks the wise man from the criminal," the doctor countered. "The weakness," she insisted, "that marks the dead from the living." One metal hand touched the doctor's face and stroked it almost fondly. "I have no weaknesses at all, you see, and nobody can withstand my strengths." She smiled again, and he was amazed at how human her expressions could be, and at how terribly beautiful she was. Still, he thought, working with the perfection of platinum helps. It doesn't get acne or moles, or even laughter lines. "What have you done with my companions?" the doctor demanded. "The humans," she sneered. "Don't try to tell me that you care, or that you are indeed one of that miserable, fragile species." She tapped on one red eye. "I am not deceived by appearances, Doctor. I know that you are not human. What I do not yet know is what you are. But you will tell me, or—" She made a slight gesture. Guards pushed Enkidu, Ngula, and Ninani into the room. "I'm sorry," the Neanderthal managed to say. His jaw was swollen, and blood trickled down the side of his face. He had not surrendered easily. Bright red marks on the arms and throats of the girls showed how they had been taken and kept silent, so as not to alert the doctor. "Don't be," he replied. "You did your best." Turning back to Ishtar, the doctor asked, "And now what?" "Now the inevitable," she replied. "I win. But there are still a few players missing, so I shall be generous, Doctor. Come, let us talk together, shall we? It'll be nice for a change to speak with someone whose mind is almost the equal of my own." She looked down at the humans in disgust. "Their pitifully tiny brains barely nourish me, but yours... Oh, that will be a feast I shall remember for a long time." "I'd most likely give you indigestion," the doctor said quickly. "My mind's very cluttered and disorganized. Really not worth the bother." Ishtar laughed delightedly. "Ah, you are an amusing one. I really will enjoy this. So, tell me, of what race are you? What is your home world?" Seeing him hesitate, she stroked his face again. "Come, little one. I will know the answers soon enough, either if you tell me now, or while I feast. And as long as you amuse me, I may hold back my hunger." Reluctantly, he told her, "Gallifrey." "Gallifrey," she echoed, her every metal sinew tense. "Gallifrey, you say?" Her face came down onto a level with his. "You are a Time Lord." When he nodded slowly, she threw back her head and laughed with undisguised pleasure. "Finally! I knew that one day I should find one of your species. I knew that your people were no mere myth, and I knew that I would find one no matter how long it took." "Or that we should find you," he corrected her. "This interference with the development of the human race cannot be allowed, Ishtar. Stop it now." "Or what?" she snapped contemptuously. Doctor, you live only as long as I choose to let you. Do not try and intimidate me. As for my interfering with the humans, look at them. She gestured across the room. Pitiful, petty little pond scum. Insignificant nothings to beings such as you or I, Doctor. Sadly, he looked back at her. There we must agree to differ, he replied. True, they are short-lived, and true, at this stage in their evolution they haven't accomplished much. But they have invented civilization from the ground up. And remember, I am a Time Lord. I know they have the potential for much greatness even now, and I won't allow you to destroy this by enslaving them to your depraved lusts. Have a care, Doctor, Ishtar warned him. I need your mind, but not your tongue. If you annoy me enough, I shall remove it without anesthetics, which seem not to work on you anyway. Respiratory bypass, he smiled, comes in handy when dropping in on hosts like you. That and all of your other intimate secrets will soon be mine, Doctor. Again she smiled. Such as the manipulation of time and the ability to live forever. With your somewhat reluctant aid, Doctor, I shall become immortal and enthroned within the fabric of time. You'll be nothing, he informed her. I cannot allow you to interfere more than you already have. It's over. Ishtar stroked his face again. I do hope that your brain has not been damaged by all of the foolishness you continually talk, she told him. Otherwise, I shall be most upset. I would so like my first taste of a Time Lord to be unsullied and enjoyable to the extreme. I'd stick in your throat like a chicken bone, the doctor promised, if you ever got the chance to try me. Privately, he was nowhere near as confident as he tried to sound, and he could see that she knew it. He refused to surrender in despair. Where there's life, there's hope, he reminded himself. But the only hope he could summon was the thought of Ace arriving on the scene with a rucksack full of Nitro-9, and he had sent Ace on a wild goose chase to a range of mountains that were a week's trek away. The doctor's attention was jerked back to the room as another figure burst through the doorway and skidded to a halt. He was fighting off the effects of intoxication and panting for breath, having run as fast as he could to get here. King Aga, Ishtar said, relishing her amusement. How kind of you to pay us this visit. The king ignored her and ran to Ninani's side. He clubbed down the soldier holding his daughter and made to scoop her into his arms. Instead, he felt a shock of pain as another of the guards slammed the butt of a spear into his back. Spasms of pain racking him, Aga collapsed to the cold floor. With a scream, Ninani threw herself across his fallen form to protect him. How touching, sneered Ishtar. What a sweet family reunion. Such a shame it must end. She sent a mental signal to her controlled guards. One savagely wrenched Ninani off her father. He ignored her screams and blows. A second guard hauled the shaken king to his unsteady feet. Ishtar slithered across to him and held her face almost touching his. I warned you what would happen, Aga, if you couldn't control this stupid offspring of yours. You should have believed me and worked harder at it. She spun about and began to move in on the girl. Ishtar, don't do it, the doctor called. Stop all of this now. No, doctor, the snake woman answered. He felt his arms gripped by two more of the controlled guards. You cannot tell me what I must and I must not do. No one can. This has gone far beyond your puny powers to correct. Be silent and see what happens to those who interfere with me. She reached Ninani. The princess was shaking partially with fear and partially from the crushing grip of the guard. The mind slave forced her to her knees in front of the goddess. Ishtar reached out her hands, cupping Ninani's beautiful, terrified face. Beg for your life, she purred. Who knows? Perhaps I shall feel generous if you amuse me. I am a princess of Uruk, Ninani said as bravely as she could, determined not to faint. I will not disgrace myself or my father by begging for favours from the likes of you. Then, gathering all the moisture she had left in her mouth, she spat in Ishtar's metallic face. Ishtar's face twitched. She dragged Ninani closer. Engula, watching in horror, cried out, "No! Spare her! Take me instead!" "What?" Curiously, Ishtar rotated her head to stare at the young priestess. "What generosity! And most unexpected!" She glanced at the doctor in amusement. "You are correct, Time Lord. This race has a good deal of potential, for the same stupid morality that you espouse." Turning her back on them both, she cupped Ninani's trembling head. "Normally, little one, I administer anaesthetic first, but you have angered me, and so I will spare you nothing of your agonies. We will experience the pain together." The probe in her right palm hissed out. Ninani's terrified eyes were riveted to it as it dilated, showing the metallic point within. "Say farewell to your mind, princess." Grabbing the girl by the temples, Ishtar sent a signal to her palm. Ninani screamed as the probe bored into her head. In the background, Aga howled in anguish and fury. Engula fainted. The doctor forced down his anger, seeing Enkidu struggling to keep his own temper in check. There was nothing any of them could do. An expression of ecstasy suffused Ishtar's writhing features. Fire consumed Ninani's mind. She fell backwards as Ishtar released her. Blood trickled from a cauterized spot on her temple, which was already showing signs of massive bruising. Her eyes opened again, and the pain was gone, along with everything else that had belonged to Ninani. Ishtar looked out from within the princess's skull and laughed in delight. Shakily at first, the princess rose to her feet, and then crossed to face her father. "Aga," she said, with Ninani's clear tones but Ishtar's venom, "my compliments on raising such a pretty child." She looked down, stroking the princess's soft robes. "It's been a long, long time since I was last this far into a humanoid form." She pirouetted about the room and laughed. "It really is quite wonderful, isn't it?" She returned to stand in front of Aga to torture him. "I will enjoy the experience. It'll be interesting to eat again and to drink. Intoxication! Something I've not felt for a while. Or perhaps a little sexual amusement. This body seems to be built well to enjoy that sport." She cocked her head to one side. "I haven't intruded myself this much into the mind and soul of one of my slaves for centuries. It really is most exhilarating." She laughed as Aga turned his face against his shoulder, whimpering, "What's wrong, Aga? Don't you want your daughter to get any fun? Shame on you! Girls need their little amusements." "Stop torturing him," the doctor broke in with cold fury. "Haven't you done enough?" "No, I haven't," Ishtar hissed, turning her metal snake form on him. "I will extract every last ounce of pleasure I can from the agonies of all that oppose me. For now it is Aga. Ninani's turn will come." Aga caught that last implication. "She is not dead?" he asked in unwilling hope. "Dead," Ishtar laughed. Her voice moved to the princess's throat. "Not yet, King. She is still here." Ninani's body tapped its head. "But in the background. Believe me, I am enjoying every second of her fear and disgust. She is powerless to stop me. She will not die until I allow it." Ninani's body smiled again. "Until then, she will experience every degradation that I care to inflict upon her. And trust me, they will be many." Ace laughed aloud in pleasure as the small flitter carrying her, Avram, and Asharbani whipped in low across the plains. Close behind them came Utnapishtim's craft, bearing him and an impatient Gilgamesh. They had made good time back from the mountains, less than a day's flight to cover 1 week's trek. They had lost a little time stopping at Uruk, where they discovered that the doctor had already left for Kish. Typical, Ace thought, just like the doctor to hog all the excitement while her back was turned. Oshanabi grinned at her. I'd forgotten how exhilarating this can be, he admitted, but powering up these 2 flitters took most of our remaining energy. I can only pray that you are right in thinking this doctor of yours can help us with a fresh supply. Trust him, Ace said, mentally crossing her fingers. He's always on top of the situation. She glanced at Avram, who was watching the landscape below them whip past at tremendous speed. Isn't this wicked? He raised an eyebrow. A strange word to use, he said. It is fascinating. I only wish I had the chance to write a song about it. Songs later, Gilgamesh called, a wide smile on his own face. Battles first. My axe is very thirsty. Ace rolled her eyes. Talk about one-track minds. Still, he'd probably enjoy the next part. It was unlikely that Ishtar would have left the temple door open and the red carpet out. The walls of Kish suddenly sprang up on the horizon. Ace was concerned to see that the copper traces on the walls were far more extensive. Had they managed to arrive in time to prevent Ishtar from finishing her plans? Oshanabi adjusted the controls slightly. The flitter nosed up and flew across the main guard tower. Ace barely caught a glimpse of a half-dozen startled faces as they shot over them. Behind her, Gilgamesh roared with pleasure, swinging his axe as Utnapishtim's flitter zipped across the walls. Ace prudently didn't look back to see if the king had managed any success with the blow. Then the flitters dropped down to about 8 feet above the crowded streets. The townspeople screamed and dived for cover as the 2 small craft whipped through the streets and towards the Temple of Ishtar. The great stone walls appeared in front of them, and Oshanabi slowed down. Ace saw why. The huge double doors were closed, and a body of the town's soldiers was ranged in front of them ready for action. We'll not get in that way, the pilot muttered. There is no other access large enough for us that I know of, Avram commented. Now what? Ace asked. Gilgamesh raised his axe high. Blood was dripping from it. Now, he said with great satisfaction, we fight. And with a loud war cry he threw himself from the flitter to the ground. Come, he cried to the mass troops, it is time for you to die. Ace sighed and hauled out one of her precious cans. Once more unto the breach, she said softly, and leapt down to join him. You really are a pitiful little worm, the doctor said loudly, hoping to distract Ishtar's attention from taunting Aga. Such pointless cruelty is hardly worthy of your powers. Slithering her snake-like body across the floor, Ishtar caught the doctor's chin in her vice-like grip. Have a care, Time Lord, she advised him. I enjoy the torments of lesser creatures. It comforts me to know that I shall never experience them. But perhaps I shall be merciful. Who knows how generous I shall feel once I have fed off your mind, or what knowledge I shall gain. She smiled down at him. You do not think I can be merciful? She asked. Oh, it's true, you know. Allow me to demonstrate. Ninani moved over to Engula, who had come to her senses and was in the grip of her guard. The man let her drop to the floor. Warily, scared almost out of her mind, the girl started to clamber to her feet. Ninani moved quickly, lashing out with her foot and catching Engula behind the knee and slamming her painfully to the floor. As she cried out, Ninani jumped on top of her, her fingers gripping the temple prostitute's throat, squeezing. Engula struggled, but to no avail. Ishtar's metal face was only inches from the doctor's. Shall I kill her now? It would save her much pain later, and that would be a mercy. Stop it, the doctor asked her. Don't do this to them. Doctor, the snake-like woman laughed, you claim to have compassion for these pitiful creatures, yet you ask me to let the harlot live so I may inflict further cruelties on her later. How insensitive of you. But very well, have it your way. Ninani let Engula's neck go. Red marks were burned into the young girl's throat. Hacking and straining, She managed to take in a coughing breath, and then another. As soon as she was breathing normally again, the guard grabbed her and hauled her to her feet once more. "Why are you doing this?" the doctor demanded. "Isn't it enough for you to win?" "No," Ishtar said icily. "Winning is never enough. You must also savour the defeat of those who opposed you. They must acknowledge that you have won, and they have lost." She didn't look round as Dumuzi entered the room. The high priest was blankly under her control again. "Take Dumuzi there. He was kind enough to find me in the hills and to give me the initial energies I needed to reach this dunghill of a city. But he has struggled against me all the time I have been in his mind. If he had been kinder, perhaps I would have been generous to him." "Perhaps," said Ninani in Ishtar's tones, "I would have let him use this pretty body for his pleasures. But it's far too late for that." "It is not enough simply to have power, Doctor," continued Ishtar grimly. "One must also use that power. And when you hold the power of life and death as I do, then sometimes I grant life, and other times—" "No," he contradicted her. "One must decide that there are times when it is wrong to use all the powers one possesses. A person must learn restraint." "Perhaps you have had to," she agreed perceptively. "You with your powers of temporal travel and that brain of yours. You could easily have ruled this pitiful world instead of protecting it." "Maybe," the doctor said cautiously. He remembered others of his race who had tried to accomplish exactly that. "But it never works. Power engenders a thirst that some insist on attempting to slake, but it becomes an insatiable master." "Quaint moralizing," sneered Ishtar. "I have the power to do as I will, and my will is to free Dumuzi." Puzzled by this apparently aberrant behaviour, the doctor stared at the high priest. As Ishtar spoke, he convulsed and gave a loud scream. Then finally the intelligence seemed to awaken within him. His eyes met those of Ishtar, and he scowled. For the first time in weeks his mind was entirely his own, the link with Ishtar quiescent. "You lied to me and used me," he said in little more than a whisper. "Yes," Ishtar agreed calmly, "and you still have one further use, priest." She turned her back on him and coiled to face the doctor. "His mind is his own again, for all the good it will do him. I have already drunk from him all the knowledge that I desire. But there is one more way in which he can serve me, one more thing he had that I want. His life." She clutched her metal hand into a ball. Dumuzi felt the fire pour through the link that had so long controlled him. Screaming, he fell onto his knees, pounding at his temples, fighting the waves of agony that thundered through his entire body. With one final drawn-out scream, his mind dissolved, and his limp body fell to the floor. The doctor dragged his appalled gaze from the wreckage of what had been a human being and stared at Ishtar. Her face showed delight, sickeningly mirrored in that of the princess. With a long, satisfied sigh, the metal face turned back to look into the doctor's. "Most enjoyable," she crooned, "and utterly delicious." "There was no need for that," the doctor replied. "Oh, but there was," Ishtar said. "A demonstration for the rest of you. And simply because I wished to do it, my will is all that counts here, Doctor. But enough of this." She started to slither across the floor. "Prepare yourself, Doctor. Your mind is next." Her right palm came up, and with a whir the probe extended and dilated, ready to consume his mind. A muffled boom broke the silence.